me ask the audience a question. How many people in this audience can name one experimental drug other than Ibogaine? That's the issue. In today's media world, in today's pharmaceutical development world, everything has to be out there every second, again and again and again and again.
Or the public loses knowledge of it.
Gone.
Let's talk about the legal issues, the sociological issues. We're in a country that has a great problem with addiction. There's no question people are alcoholics, they're using heroin, they're using cocaine. In fact, the addiction problem in the United States is over $200 billion. Every year, the cost to Americans of addiction is greater than the cost of the war in Iraq. In the one country that needs it most, it's illegal. Do you think that will ever change?
It may or it may not. What we're looking at now is that second and third generation Ibogaine-like drugs have been manufactured, which are not restricted. One such drug, 18-methoxychloronaridine, was developed by Stanley Glick from Albany Medical College, and he designed the molecule specifically to overcome all of the objections that the government was putting to Ibogaine.
It's a synthetic.
It's a synthetic drug, no cardiac, no negative cardiac effects, no negative neurotoxic effect, and possibly not hallucinogen. But in the animal model, it shows significant anti-addictive effects.
Now, let me talk about the pharmacological and the neurological issues briefly, because the brain is affected by Ibogaine. It has been said that Ibogaine resets the addict's brain. What does that mean, to reset the brain?
Well, it may be an oversimplification. Ibogaine acts in all of the neurohormonal systems where drugs of abuse are acting. And exactly what it's doing, we can't say because it's unknown. We do know that we're seeing significant activity, and the totality of those effects are basically to transform a runaway addict on day one into a non-addict on day 3.
Now, Deborah Mash, who you mentioned, used to work in Florida. But then I understood she went out of the country to St. Kitts. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Why did she do that?
Deborah Mash abandoned an FDA study because she wanted to develop nor-Ibogaine rather than Ibogaine, and that abandonment of the FDA study virtually derailed Ibogaine development.
It's so unfortunate that it happened that way. I have to ask one question about what are called NMDA receptors in the brain. As some of you psychology experts may know, the NMDA receptor is associated with consciousness and cognition and brain function. And apparently, Ibogaine has some effect on the NMDA receptors. Have you heard anything about this, or what do you think of that?
I hand over all of this really specialized work to the specialists who are doing it. So the answer is yes. If you look at Ibogaine and how it was determined to be working, the first thing they recognized that it was working in the dopamine area because all drugs of abuse are working in the dopamine area. Then two researchers at NIDA found that it was an NMDA agonist, and they felt that this was a core issue as to its efficacy. But it's then been shown to be an acetylcholine antagonist, and MASH claims it's an opiate agonist. But
there's a lot of technical stuff.
There's a lot of technical stuff.
Well, we know it works. We know it works. That's the important thing.
It works in humans. It works in animals. Every doctor who's seen it.
Incredible. I just have to ask you about Mark Molliver's findings about Ibogaine and the slight effect in killing some cerebellum cells in rats. What do you think of that? I mean, didn't he come out and say that he thought it would be actually a good thing in humans?
Mark Molliver is a brilliant neurologist, and he was contracted with it by the National Institute on Drug Abuse to find the neurotoxicity levels of Ibogaine.
You're kidding. In other words, they said to him, find out what's wrong with this.
Well, they said find out what levels is neurotoxic.
Okay.
And Mark did, but when he was presenting to NIDA, he said that regardless of his findings, the work should be carried on.
He did. Okay, so that's a strong endorsement. I got to talk about English literature. I teach English.
Okay.
Thomas de Quincey wrote Confessions of the English Opium Eater to warn people about the dangers of opium use and how horrible it can be Of course, he talked about the pleasures, but he also talked about the horrible nightmares he had. Gonzo journalist Hunter S. Thompson, of course, used every single drug known to man, including cocaine, marijuana, heroin, and often used alcohol, especially when he was on the Letterman show. Aldous Huxley experimented with LSD and mescaline and wrote about it in The Doors of Perception. Many of these writers had a lot of problems, including Coleridge, problems that were related specifically to their drug dependency. Now, is it possible that if Ibogaine were available to some of these people, that they could have stopped their addictive behavior and been more productive and written more books, and we would have had more literature from them?
The answer is yes and no. You know, you have to get your patient into your treatment facility and see what happens. Some patients who we viewed as uniquely opportune, these would be the patients that it was going to be perfect for, weren't. And other patients who were like, last case scenario, this is not going to work on this patient, why are we doing this, turned out to be perfect patients.
Can I ask you, you're familiar with Dimitri's work, correct? Yes. What percentage of success is he having?
Well, what we have to look at is success in terms of what the patient perceives as success.
Well, stopping addiction, let's say that's your goal. If that's your goal, well, approximately, how well is it working?
It'll work for one day on everybody, and then it's basically taking it from there. I got a call from the desk officer at the DEA in the American Embassy in the Netherlands, and that was an amazing call to me because the DEA calling me up, and I didn't believe it was the DEA, but it was the DEA. And the desk officer said, "Look, I don't understand how the Dutch are allowing you to use a demand reduction drug like Ibogaine." And drug philosophy breaks down into two camps: demand reduction and harm reduction. Harm reduction is minimizing harm to the patient. Demand reduction is basically interdicting drugs. So here we are working with the Dutch for 3 years, and we're viewing Ibogaine as a harm reduction drug. It's less than harm. So I asked the DEA officer, how do you view it as a demand reduction drug? He says, well, look, if what you say is true, and we're going to get 10% of your patients taking Ibogaine, and 2 weeks later they're going back to heroin, and 10% of your patients using Ibogaine, and a year later they're still off, well, we're looking at a bell curve, and everybody else is falling somewhere on that bell curve. And if that's the situation, we're going to reduce drug income to the cartels by 50%. And if we can do that, they're easier targets for us.
My gosh, if you could reduce drug income to those illicit or illegal organizations in certain places, are you ever nervous, Howard, when you're walking around that somebody's going to come after you?
I gave it some thought initially, but it came on in degrees. One, I realized that other persons had gone ahead of me, like Vincent Dole and Marie Neiswinder, who developed methadone maintenance, and nobody killed them. And then I figured once I got my patents out, that was public knowledge, and getting rid of me no longer served any purpose.
Howard, I have had such a good time talking to you. I want to just take 1 minute of audience questions, okay? I'm going to open it up to the audience. I know we're short on time here, folks. I'm going to try to get you out before 3:30. I know some of you have class. How many of you have to go to a class at 3:30? Raise your hands. I mean 4:30. How many have to go to class at 4:30? Okay, a few of you do. I will definitely end way before that, so you have time to go. Let me take 3 audience questions, okay? We're going to take them from the back first. Shoot.
Suboxone is principally a narcotic agonist, even though it's described as an agonist-antagonist. In other words, it acts like a narcotic. It does not interrupt narcotic use. Ibogaine interrupts narcotic use and doesn't act like a narcotic.
Next question. Go.
What's the difference between this waking dreamlike state and the same kind of state induced by dimethyltryptamine?
I don't think that dimethyltryptamine produces a dreamlike state, not similar to your normal dream state. If you've had DMT and you find that similar to your dream state, then I'm disputing.
Next question. Go.
Why is it prohibited in the United States?
Why is it prohibited in the United States? That's a good, clear question, easily understandable.
Difficult to say, and it's either or maybe something else. It's either because I informed federal officials it was useful in treating heroin addiction, and they said, we don't want that, or they just lumped it in with the anti-hallucinogen legislation that was happening in the mid to late 60s, or something else.
Howard, I have to thank you. I think our audience loved the discussion, the interview. We learned a lot. It's an amazing substance. I congratulate you on your discovery. Thank you.
You can find out a lot about Ibogaine by Googling it, just everywhere.